Amidst the gilded haze of the Shadowfen Solstice Gala, where crystal chandeliers wept prisms of light upon swirling silks and shadowed intrigues, Isolde Marais stood frozen, her ivory robe a luminous betrayal that proclaimed an unintended vow to the Duke himself, a declaration etched in ancient rite, binding her fate to his in the eyes of a merciless assembly. The elder matron's gloved hand clutched her arm with possessive fervor, while Isolde's auburn locks framed a visage of solemn defiance, her amber eyes wide with the dawning horror of a life appended by one fateful garment's whisper. If this veil of mistaken destiny has ensnared your curiosity, urging you to unravel the threads of love and legacy, subscribe now, for the revelations that follow will illuminate shadows you never knew concealed such fire. The grand halls of Shadowfen Citadel pulsed with the opulent rhythm of the Solstice Gala, where velvet drapes cascaded like midnight rivers and golden lanterns cast flickering auras over assembled nobility, their jewels winking like distant stars in a velvet sky. Isolde Marais, her auburn tresses swept into an elegant chignon that framed her solemn amber-eyed visage, felt the weight of borrowed silk against her skin. The ivory robe, so exquisitely embroidered with silver vines that seemed to pulse with captured moonlight, clinging to her form in short-sleeved puffs that bared her arms save for elbow-length gloves of pristine lace. It was a garment of ethereal beauty, one that had transformed her from a mere scribe into something spectral, yet as she navigated the marble floors, the elder matron's insistent grip on her arm, a woman draped in amethyst hues of aged authority, propelled her forward, whispering assurances that now rang hollow amid the growing murmurs. Isolde had known the robe was too fine for her station, a relic from her guardian's wardrobe meant for another, but in this moment, as gazes sharpened and whispers swelled like gathering storm clouds, she sensed the error's gravity. "You must wear it, my dear," Lady Thalira Voss had urged earlier that evening in their modest carriage, her lined face alight with a peculiar satisfaction, rings glinting on fingers that clutched a cane for support. "Your own drab attire would make you fade into the walls, and I refuse to have my aid appear so diminished at such an event." Isolde, at 24, had acquiesced as always. Survival demanded it, after her father's ruinous debts had stripped them of estate and dignity, leaving her mother frail and dependent in their cramped urban lodgings. Pride had long been sacrificed on the altar of necessity. She was a scribe, a companion to the elite, invisible by design. Yet now, visibility ensnared her. The citadel's vast entryway, with its sweeping staircase of polished obsidian and overhanging chandelier that dripped crystal tears, amplified every step. Guests in resplendent attire, lords in tailored coats of deep indigo, ladies in gowns of crimson and gold, parted slightly, their eyes tracing her form with a mix of curiosity and something sharper, like predators scenting vulnerability. Isolde's posture remained upright, her expression a mask of composed seriousness, but inwardly, unease coiled tight. Why did they stare so? The ivory fabric shimmered under the lights, its train whispering secrets against the floor, but it was only a dress, or so she thought. The carriage ride from their temporary quarters had been interminable, snowflakes dancing beyond frosted panes as Lady Thalira dozed fitfully, her snores a counterpoint to the clatter of hooves on iced roads. Isolde had gazed at the wintry expanse, steeling herself for an evening of fetching shawls and enduring small talk, never imagining the robe's peril. Shadowfen Citadel loomed like a behemoth from ancient tales, its spires piercing the night sky, windows aglow with promise of warmth and excess. Footmen in livery ushered them inside, and that's when the stares began, subtle at first, then insistent, as if she carried a banner of defiance. "People are watching," Isolde murmured to Lady Thalira as they approached the grand ballroom, its doors flung wide to reveal a sea of dancers and orchestral swells. "Of course they are," her guardian replied with a dismissive wave, her voice laced with that imperious tone that brooked no dissent. "You carry yourself well in that robe. Now chin up. Confidence is the true adornment." But Isolde felt exposed, the ivory a spotlight in a room of muted tones, her bare shoulders prickling under the scrutiny. She longed for her usual muted grays, the colors of obscurity that let her blend, observe, survive. Deeper into the fray, the Duke himself held court at the receiving line, Lord Darius Kale, a figure of severe elegance, tall and broad-shouldered in black velvet, his raven hair tamed yet rebellious at the edges, gray eyes like storm clouds holding secrets. Society dubbed him the Iron Duke, unyielding in demeanor, untouched by romance's whims since a scandalous betrayal years prior. Isolde had no reason to notice him beyond duty, yet as their eyes met across the throng, his gaze locking with hers in a blaze of recognition she couldn't fathom, her breath hitched, the world narrowing to that charged connection. What storm had she unwittingly summoned? If this glimpse into Isolde's vulnerable entry into a world of hidden rights has stirred questions in your mind, what secrets lurk in borrowed finery, and how might one glance alter destinies? Comment below with your thoughts, and let's unravel these threads together. In the shadowed alcoves of Shadowfen Citadel, where tapestries depicted ancient conquests woven with threads of gold and myth, Isolde Moray sought a momentary refuge from the ballroom's relentless gaze. Her ivory robe, with its delicate silver vines that caught the flicker of wall sconces, felt heavier now, a silken chain binding her to an unease she couldn't name. She pressed against a cool stone pillar, her amber eyes scanning the crowd, ladies in jewel-toned gowns laughing behind fans, gentlemen in crisp collars debating estates and alliances, while her mind drifted to the life that had led her here, a tapestry of loss and quiet endurance. Born to a once prosperous merchant of blended lineages, her father's Eastern roots mingling with her mother's Western heritage, Isolde had known comfort in her youth, summers in verdant hills where she learned scripts and stories from distant lands. But ruin came swift. Her father's ventures collapsed under bad fortunes and worse choices, leaving debts that swallowed their home, their heirlooms, even the locket that held her mother's portrait. At 21, Isolde had stepped into the role of provider, her sharp mind and steady hand securing positions as a scribe and aide to the affluent. Now serving Lady Thalira Voss, a widow of faded nobility whose joints protested the cold and whose tongue spared no one, Isolde navigated a world of privilege from its edges, fetching inks, transcribing letters, swallowing pride like bitter tea. Lady Thalira, seated now in a plush armchair amid her cronies, her amethyst gown pooling like spilled wine, waved Isolde over with a ring-laden hand. "Fetch my fan, child. This heat is insufferable." Isolde obeyed, her movements graceful despite the inner turmoil, her serious expression masking the ache of dependency. She yearned for more than this half-life, for a place where her intellect wasn't a tool but a gift, yet dreams were luxuries the destitute couldn't afford. Her mother, frail in their dim city quarters, relied on the wages Isolde sent. One misstep, and starvation loomed. Yet beneath her composure lay deeper wounds, a father's abandonment in death, a mother's fading light, the sting of suitors who vanished when fortunes turned. Isolde had armored her heart, choosing invisibility over vulnerability, her desires buried like forgotten scrolls. The Duke's gaze from earlier lingered in her thoughts, a puzzle she dismissed. Men like Lord Darius Kale, with his iron reputation and vast domains, noticed scribes only as shadows. As the evening deepened, Isolde returned to Lady Thalira's side, enduring the matron's tales of bygone glories. "The Shadowfen solstice is legendary," Lady Thalira murmured, eyes gleaming. "The Duke hosts it yearly, but few know its true weight, old rites, hidden meanings." Isolde nodded politely, unaware how those words foreshadowed her entanglement. Whispers grew around her, guests glancing at the ivory robe with knowing smiles or furrowed brows. A young heiress in rose silk gasped as Isolde passed, fanning herself dramatically. Unsettled, Isolde excused herself to the retiring room, its mirrors reflecting her form, a woman of poised defiance, auburn hair framing a face etched with quiet strength, yet shadowed by doubt. She adjusted the robe's bodice, its pearl fastenings like stars along her spine, wondering at its allure. Lady Thalira had insisted, "My grandniece's elopement left it unused. Waste not, and it becomes you far better than that dreary taupe." Gratitude warred with instinct. This finery felt like a mask, ill-fitting for one who thrived in obscurity. Returning, she spotted the Duke again, conversing with lords, his profile sharp as carved onyx, expression remote yet commanding. Rumors swirled about him, a brother's treachery, a lost love, a child he raised from the ashes of betrayal. The Iron Duke, they called him, impervious to affection, retreating to his estates like a wounded beast. Isolde felt no stake in his mysteries, until a footman approached, his livery crisp, voice neutral. "You are requested in the Azure Salon, miss." "Urgently." Confusion knit her brow. "By whom?" The footman demurred, leading her through labyrinthine halls lined with portraits of stern ancestors, their eyes seeming to judge. The Azure Salon awaited, its walls painted in oceanic depths, fire crackling in a hearth framed by marble waves. And there, by the window overlooking snow-veiled gardens, stood Lord Darius Kale, his back to her, tension radiating like heat from embers. "Close the door," he commanded without turning, voice deep and edged with frost. Isolde complied, the click echoing her racing pulse. This summons reeked of peril, yet curiosity, and a spark of defiance, held her firm. What secrets did this robe conceal, and how had it drawn the Duke's ire? The Azure Salon's fire popped like distant thunder, casting elongated shadows that danced across silk-paneled walls and gilded frames holding scenes of mythic seas. Isolde Marais stood rigid, her ivory robe's train pooling at her feet like spilled moonlight, its silver vines seeming to writhe in the flickering light. Each flicker of flame made the embroidery shimmer as if alive, a quiet accusation in thread. Lord Darius Kale turned then, his gray eyes stormlit, broad frame filling the space with an authority that made the air thicken, each measured step echoing like a verdict. "Who sent you in that robe?" he demanded, voice low but laced with accusation, stepping closer until his presence loomed, cedar-scented and unyielding. Isolde's amber gaze met his without flinching, her serious expression a fragile shield against the unexpected assault. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet she remained planted, feeling the warmth of the fire brushing against her skin and the cool shadow of his authority pressing in from the other side. Lady Thalira Voss insisted, it was hers, meant for another. "I am her scribe, my lord, not some schemer." Her voice, steady but quiet, barely bridged the gap between defiance and fear. But Darius's scrutiny deepened, his eyes tracing the robe's lines as if its ivory fabric were a blade poised at his chest. "You claim ignorance?" In Shadowfen's tradition, ivory at the solstice gala signifies acceptance, a bride's vow to her intended. "The entire assembly believes you have pledged yourself to me." His words were deliberate, each syllable rolling through the room like a bell toll, hammering her certainty into shards of panic. The revelation struck like cold rain, draining color from her cheeks and tightening her chest. Tradition? She had heard whispers of ancient rites tied to the Duke's lineage, born from an ancestor's defiant love amid forbidden unions, but never imagined it would confront her now, alive and binding. Lady Thalira's mischievous satisfaction in the carriage, the stairs in the ballroom, it coalesced into a suffocating horror. "I knew nothing of this," Isolde whispered, pride warring with panic, each word trembling under the weight of inevitable ruin. Her reputation, delicate as frost on a morning pond, threatened to shatter. No employer would dare hire a perceived fortune-seeker, leaving her mother destitute, her family name a shadow. Darius's face tightened, the iron mask of authority softening just long enough for a flicker of something, sympathy, to pass beneath. "Society will brand you a manipulator if we deny it outright. Your position ends. Whispers follow you forever." He paced with silent boots on the thick rug, the hem of his coat brushing against shadows, shoulders carved from years of solitude and uncompromising will. "We must feign the betrothal for the house party's duration, 3 days. Present unity, then devise a quiet dissolution. It protects us both from scandal's jaws." Shock rooted her to the spot, but a spark of calculation flickered. Pretend engagement, to this enigmatic duke, whose betrayal by kin had forged his isolation. Yet refusal would be ruin itself, each step toward denial a step toward annihilation. "And after?" she asked, voice steady despite the tremor curling in her stomach, the firelight glinting off silver threads as if mocking her hesitation. "We part as strangers, reputations intact," he replied, but his gray eyes lingered on her longer than necessary, a spark of unspoken curiosity and attraction igniting amid the frost. Every subtle shift, the tilt of his head, the quiet set of his jaw, the storm behind his gaze, pulled at her resolve like tides against a fragile shore. As they returned to the ballroom, his arm a reluctant anchor around hers. The room's hush confirmed the rumor's rapid spread. Every whisper, every sideways glance, seemed to press against her chest like a living thing. The Dowager Duchess, elegant in sapphire, beamed mistaken delight. At last my son chooses. The ivory rite fulfilled. Isolde's pulse raced, each beat a reminder that this facade, born of error, now bound her to depths unknown. Her heart, usually a sentinel of reason, threatened rebellion against the logic of survival. Even as she walked among the glittering crowd, she caught his gaze again, gray eyes that could pierce stone, tracing her with an intensity that was both a warning and a promise. What hidden flames might this spark awaken? What desires, long suppressed by duty and decorum, could emerge when circumstance forced them into proximity, their bodies brushing under the guise of propriety, minds spinning with tension? The night stretched before her like a velvet trap, and though she swore to navigate it as a careful observer, a small unbidden thrill raced through her veins. Survival was one thing, desire another entirely. And in Darius Kale's shadow, the line between the two blurred like smoke in the firelight. Night descended softly over the citadel, the snow outside a hushed audience to the evening's intrigues. Isolde lingered a moment by her chamber window, tracing the frost patterns as if seeking guidance in their delicate symmetry. The day's trials had left her mind buzzing, each glance from Darius, each whispered speculation from the assembled nobility, layering upon her like the snow on the citadel's turrets. The borrowed gown of azure now lay folded neatly on the chair, its fabric still carrying the scent of his cedar-scented proximity. The dinner bell tolled through the corridors, resonating like a summons to strategy rather than indulgence. Isolde descended to the grand dining hall, her posture carefully measured, her amber eyes alert for every glance, every subtle movement that might betray a challenge or a threat. The candles flickered, their light painting the gilded walls in moving patterns that seemed almost conspiratorial. She spotted Darius across the hall, standing with an ease that contrasted the tension he radiated, gray eyes sweeping the room, guarding and calculating in equal measure. He intercepted her at the table's edge, his hand brushing briefly against hers, a fleeting contact, yet one that lingered in memory and nerve. "The story is rehearsed, yes?" he murmured under the din, voice low, commanding. "Lady Voss, the autumn recital, correspondence, secrecy. Details must be consistent." His lips quirked with something akin to approval as he led her to a seat beside him, the veneer of their betrothal layering a sense of security over the unease she could not quite shake. Conversation was a minefield. Lords commented on her rise in station with faintly venomous amusement. Ladies offered sugar-laced compliments that carried hidden barbs. "Such a swift ascent for a scribe," one remarked, her eyes glinting with curiosity and challenge. Isolde parried with elegance, each word chosen with care, while Darius, beside her, deflected with quiet authority. Their synchronized dance of dialogue revealed a growing understanding, not only survival but subtle dominance in social warfare. Later, the library beckoned, quiet as a secret. Rows of tomes stood like sentinels, dust motes swirling in the golden lamplight. Darius guided her to a secluded alcove, where the warmth of the fire softened the chill of the room. "My brother eloped with my betrothed," he confessed quietly, fingers brushing the leather spine of an ancient book. "Fever claimed them both soon after. Duty binds me to my responsibilities, yet warmth eludes my life." His gaze lingered, storm-gray eyes clouded with vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show. Isolde listened, heart tightening with unexpected empathy. In these shared confessions, the rigid walls surrounding Darius's persona seemed to tremble, revealing not the Duke as the world knew him, but the man beneath, haunted, principled, yet achingly human. Afternoon brought laughter to the citadel in the form of young Aloan, a spirited child of 7 with curls like midnight silk and eyes that mirrored Darius's storms. She tugged at Isolde's gown during tea, her small hand demanding attention without pretense. "You're pretty, like the stories," she said, climbing into Isolde's lap. The child's delight was infectious, and Isolde spun tales of far-off lands and daring voyages, her voice softening the day's tension. Darius observed quietly, expression unreadable, before finally murmuring, "She seldom warms to strangers. You have a gift." Evening deepened the complexities. Rivalries emerged. A matron insinuated manipulation. A rival's flirtation with Darius tested the limits of their carefully constructed facade. A misplaced letter hinted at secrets. Whispers of hidden fortunes drew opportunists to the edges of the household. Each moment was a balancing act, defense against slander, poise under scrutiny, and now the growing spark between her and the Duke, subtle yet undeniable. A brush of hands here, a shared glance there, sent currents of unspoken desire through her like electric fire. At last, she returned to her chamber, the azure gown discarded for simpler night attire, yet the echo of the day's encounters lingered. She stood before her mirror, a woman poised, yet unsettled, heart hammering against the constraints of propriety and the thrill of possibility. The pretense weighed heavily, but so too did a quiet question. Could this delicate charade, born of necessity and error, reveal truths worth embracing? Could attraction forged in the crucible of necessity ignite something real, something dangerous, yet impossible to ignore? Beyond the citadel walls, the snow whispered secrets to the night, and within the corridors, shadows moved with intent. Alliances were being tested, loyalties measured, and hearts, both guarded and vulnerable, poised on the cusp of revelation. Isolde's reflection held more than her own gaze. It was the mirror of the choices yet to come, the risks she must navigate, and the growing certainty that some truths, once kindled, could not be contained. Twilight draped Shadowfen Citadel in indigo, lanterns bobbing like fireflies as the solstice festivities dwindled into whispers and intimate gatherings. Isolde Mirai moved with cautious grace, her emerald silk gown tracing hidden currents beneath the surface of civility. Every question from the assembled guests felt like a hidden blade, every compliment a veiled test of her wit and endurance. The charade of betrothal weighed heavily upon her, yet Darius Kale's proximity lent both peril and protection, his hand steadying her chair, his gaze lingering just long enough to ignite undercurrents of emotion she could not name aloud. But the evening's fragile rhythm shattered. A piercing cry echoed from the nursery. Eloan, the Duke's ward, collapsed, fever racking her tiny frame amid the masquerade of children's laughter. Isolde was at Darius's side in an instant, heart hammering as the small governess wrung her hands in frantic despair. It came sudden like a storm, she gasped, lifting the child into her arms with trembling care. Darius followed swiftly, each stride precise, but the mask of authority slipped as panic bared his raw edge. The physician arrived at last, breathless and grave, diagnosing a virulent ague that threatened the fragile spark of life in Eloan's frail body. In the nursery, warmth from the hearth did little to soothe the chill of fear. The walls, painted with stars and constellations, seemed to close in as Isolde held the child, feeling the tiny body burn against her chest. Darius knelt beside them, his gray eyes stormlit, hands trembling slightly as he brushed damp hair from Eloan's fevered face. The Duke's voice, low and broken, reverberated through the room, "Not her, not her." The confession followed swiftly, like a dam breaking. "I lost them once," he whispered, voice ragged. His brother, his betrothed, gone abroad, leaving him with a ward who carried their shadow. "I swore no more loss. She is all that remains." His hands, massive and calloused, rested lightly over Isolde's, anchoring them together in shared urgency. Vulnerability poured from him, not coldness, but shields shattered in the face of a parent's fear. Isolde's own defenses trembled. She had prided herself on self-reliance, yet now her independence felt fragile, exposed to the tempest of affection and dread swirling around the small fevered form. Her fingers brushed Darius's, lingering, not in duty, but in the silent understanding of shared fear and the fragile tether between them. His gaze, heated and searching, promised more than protection. It held an unspoken need, a pull that defied propriety. As hours stretched, the fever refused to abate. Isolde stayed by the bedside, whispering soft tales of distant lands to keep the child's mind tethered to joy rather than illness. Darius's hand occasionally found hers, each touch brief but incendiary, each glance loaded with unvoiced confession. The charade faded. They were no longer acting as allies bound by scandal, but as two souls entwined in the vulnerability of shared responsibility, passion kindling in the spaces between care and fear. A moment came when Eloan, drowsy but conscious, murmured in the soft light, "Stay, please." The plea was both for comfort and affirmation. Darius's jaw tightened, eyes glimmering with unspoken conflict, yet he leaned close, letting Isolde take the child's weight while he whispered a vow he had never spoken to another soul. "I will not let anything harm you, not while I breathe." In that hour, the world beyond the nursery ceased to exist. The ballroom, the whispers of rivals, even the solstice festivities faded. All that remained was the heat of proximity, the shared breath, and the electric tension of unacknowledged attraction. Every lingering gaze, every accidental touch, seared their awareness. The stakes were no longer merely survival or pretense. The child's fragile life bound them to each other, and desire wove itself through fear and devotion. By the time the fever finally eased with the arrival of stronger medicine and the first hints of dawn creeping through the window, bonds had deepened irrevocably. Frustration softened into fervent hope. The midpoint had shifted. They were no longer merely allies navigating a dangerous pretense. Now their hearts had entered the storm, unpredictable, consuming, and undeniable. And as Isolde settled into the small cot beside Aloin's bed, Darius's presence lingering near the door, the unspoken truth pulsed between them. This solstice, shadowed by fear and firelight, had changed everything. No longer could they claim detachment. No longer could either ignore the magnetic pull drawing them into one another's orbit. The citadel's towers scraped a moonless sky, wind shrieking against stone like ghosts mourning forgotten sins. Within the nursery, shadows flickered across painted stars, the hearth casting warmth that barely breached the chill of dread. Aloin's fever had crested, small body writhing beneath blankets that were damp with sweat. Isolde Marais, sleeves rolled and linen damp with water, and her own trembling hands, pressed cool cloths to the child's brow. Her amber eyes, usually bright with measured control, were hollow, lined with exhaustion that etched her face into a mask of care and fear. Auburn strands clung to her temple, sweat and weariness mingling into a crown of frantic devotion. Darius Cale's presence was relentless and raw. He paced the nursery rug, coat discarded, sleeves rumpled, gray eyes wild with desperation that stripped his usual authority bare. Every stride across the floor was a silent thunderclap, his jaw tight, fists clenching and unclenching as if willing himself to shield Aloin from a fate he could not control. The physician's words haunted the air like a requiem. "If the fever holds till dawn, she may not wake." The statement lodged in Isolde's chest like a knife, reverberating with echoes of her mother's wasting illness years ago. The helplessness that had forged her independence surged once more, fracturing her carefully honed defenses. "Fight, little one," she whispered, voice cracking, holding the girl as though sheer will could stave off death. Doubt gnawed relentlessly. Am I the curse here? Or the only hope? Darius's despair found voice in a storm of anger. "This is my penance for trusting once," he barked, shoulders tense, his voice echoing off painted walls. The weight of his past, the shadows of a brother's betrayal, spilled into the room. "I cannot lose again," he thundered, his hands brushing the edge of the table as if the furniture itself had failed him. Isolde recoiled, wounded in ways more than physical. The isolation of her youth, the poverty that had forced attachment, flared anew, every instinct telling her to flee, to protect herself from loss once more. "I am not the one you blame," she shot back, voice trembling but firm, yet the words felt fragile under the storm of his grief. The pretense, the betrothal, even the fragile trust between them, teetered on the edge of fracture. Silence fell like a tomb for a heartbeat. The distant laughter and music of revelers in the great hall seemed obscene, mocking their vigil. Whispers had begun to drift through the halls. The cursed duke, the wretched girl. The world beyond the nursery was indifferent to suffering, and in that indifference, hope seemed a fragile, brittle thing. Aloin's breaths grew shallow, each inhale a whispered plea against mortality. Isolde sank to the floor beside the child, pressing her cheek to the small burning forehead, tears sliding unchecked down her cheeks. She was certain fate demanded sacrifice, certain that survival was beyond her reach. The weight of helplessness pressed against her chest, and in that moment, the nursery became a crucible, a test of endurance, heart, and will. Darius withdrew into the shadows near the doorway, hands brushing his face as though hiding from his own despair. Yet the separation was unbearable, a gash in the fragile fabric of their alliance. The tension between them became a living thing, crackling like static in the room. Fear, frustration, and a desire neither would admit pressed close, almost suffocating. Then, a whisper of sound, the faintest stir from Eloan. Her eyelids flickered, lashes wet and heavy, and a weak, almost imperceptible breath escaped her lips. Isolde's hand shook violently as she adjusted the cloth on the girl's brow, her tears mixing with relief, terror, and unvoiced hope. Darius stepped closer, every stride measured yet trembling, and without speaking, crouched beside her. Their hands met over the child's blankets, fingers brushing, lingering, a touch that said more than words ever could. We survive this together, or not at all. Minutes bled into hours. Each breath, each flicker of life from Eloan, tethered them to the present and to each other. The pretense of betrothal faded into insignificance. What mattered was the fragile heartbeat beneath their vigilance, and the subtle, undeniable connection that now existed between them. Darius's gray eyes softened as he watched her, amber meeting stormlit intensity, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. They were bound not by duty or facade, but by the weight of shared fear, and perhaps by desire that neither dared name aloud. As the first pale hints of dawn brushed the citadel walls, the fever began to break, tiny fingers curling weakly around Isolde's hand. Exhausted, she sank further against the cot, and Darius finally allowed himself to rest a hand on her shoulder. Neither spoke, words unnecessary. The night had tested them in ways neither had expected. Love, duty, fear, and longing were entwined now, tangled beyond disentanglement. And as the citadel stirred to life outside, snow crunching under the first servant steps, the quiet nursery held a single undeniable truth. From despair and near loss had emerged a bond forged in fire, and neither Darius Kale nor Isolde Marai would ever be the same. The first rays of dawn filtered through the nursery curtains, soft and tentative, gilding the room in gentle gold. Isolde Marai rose from the small cot where she had kept vigil, muscles stiff, eyes heavy yet alight with the fire of newfound resolve. The night's terror lingered as a shadow on her skin, but it no longer dictated her actions. Each measured breath carried the certainty that she could no longer hide behind pretense or fear. Eloan's eyelids fluttered, revealing the faint clarity of awareness that had seemed so distant hours before. "Aunt Isolde," the child whispered, voice frail yet insistent, shattering the remnants of despair that had clung to the nursery's corners. Relief surged through Isolde, a visceral, almost overwhelming tide that left her knees weak. She pressed her lips to the child's damp hair, whispering assurances, letting her warmth seep into the fragile frame beneath her hands. Darius, slumped in a chair against the wall, looked up from a haze of exhaustion. His gray eyes, storm-lit and softened by relief, met hers with an intensity that had shifted from fear to unspoken acknowledgement. In that glance, the weight of the night's trials crystallized. Lives had been at stake, vulnerabilities exposed, and the barrier between them, constructed of pride, duty, and hesitation, crumbled irrevocably. "Is she truly stable?" he asked, voice low, roughened by tension and sleeplessness. She nodded, brushing a stray strand of auburn hair from her own weary face. "She is. The fever has broken. She will live, Darius. And we will see that she thrives." A quiet understanding passed between them, unspoken but undeniable. In the crucible of fear and care, they had discovered truths that pretense could no longer contain. Isolde confronted the stark reality of her own detachment. Independence and caution had kept her safe, but at the cost of warmth and connection. Now, with the child's life renewed, she realized that avoidance was no longer survival. It was exile from the life she might yet embrace. Darius, ever guarded, allowed a rare vulnerability to surface. His hand brushed hers lightly, tentative yet deliberate, the smallest gesture holding the promise of more. I thought I could protect her alone," he admitted, voice tight with the weight of emotion he had long buried. "But life demands trust. And perhaps it demands something more." The words struck Isolde with quiet force. She extended her own hand, letting their fingers intertwine over the blankets that had held both their fears and their hope. "We cannot let shadows define us," she said softly, yet with a determination that steadied the room. "We will face this together. No more pretense, no more isolation. Eloan is ours to protect, and we are ours to find." A tremor of tension and longing passed between them, the dawn's light gilding the quiet intimacy of the moment. The night's ordeal had reshaped the delicate dance of facade into something tangible: mutual reliance, trust, and the faint stirrings of desire they could no longer deny. Isolde's resolve strengthened. She would not allow their arrangement to dissolve into mere social convenience. She would challenge Darius to acknowledge the reality their actions had created, the undeniable bond forged in shared peril. "We will not end this charade simply because it began as pretense," she said, her voice firmer now. "If we are bound by circumstance, let us choose what we are bound to, and that choice is not fear. That choice is truth." Darius's gray eyes darkened, intensity sharpening, storm and sunlight mingling in their gaze. "Truth," he echoed, voice low and rough with emotion. "Then let it be so." Together, they arranged Eloan on the bed, blankets tucked with gentle hands, ensuring her comfort as she slept fitfully, still fragile yet no longer at death's edge. The nursery, once a chamber of despair, now radiated tentative hope. And in that fragile dawn, Isolde and Darius understood that the night had irrevocably changed them. Outside, the citadel stirred, snow glinting like scattered diamonds across battlements and roofs. Inside, hearts bound by vigilance, fear, and unspoken longing prepared for the day's inevitable confrontations. The pretense could no longer shield them from society's gaze, or from the truths burgeoning between them. But now, with courage born of crisis, they were ready. No longer merely a duke and a scribe acting for appearances, they were allies, guardians, and something more, the bond forged in midnight's shadow ready to step into the light of day. The choice was theirs: surrender to the world's expectations, or claim the bond that had been tested, burned, and reborn in fevered nights and fragile dawns. Thunder shook the citadel, a chorus of ancient drums echoing through stone halls as lightning fractured the sky. In the storm-lashed conservatory, glass panes rattled like fragile hearts under siege. Rain lashed the outside, drumming a relentless rhythm that mirrored the thundering of Isolde Marai's pulse. Her emerald silk gown clung to her from the night's vigil, wet strands of auburn hair framing a face alight with defiance and exhaustion. Amber eyes, sharp and unyielding, locked on Darius Kale, whose gray gaze was a storm in its own right, equal parts fear, longing, and the burden of past loss. "This ends now," she said, stepping forward into the circle of tension that surrounded him, the words slicing the charged air. "Not the bond, but the fear." Her hands clenched at her sides, knuckles white, as lightning illuminated her determination. Darius recoiled, a shadow of the man haunted by mistakes and betrayal. "I cannot risk shattering again," he whispered, voice taut with anguish, body rigid with old scars, the pain of his brother's flight, the death of his betrothed, the burden of raising Eloan alone. Each memory had been a chain, each hesitation a wall. But the night's vigil had forged new truths. Isolde advanced, her presence fierce yet unwavering. "You are not your past, Darius. You are not defined by fear or by guilt. Love isn't betrayal, it is the courage to heal, the courage to step forward, even when the storm rages." Her words struck him with the force of lightning itself. A letter long hidden, slipped into memory, the final words of his brother, an admission of regret, a confession that freed him from chains of guilt he had carried for decades. Pain gave way to clarity. Walls he had erected with steel and shadow trembled. The air thickened, charged with both the storm outside and the fire between them. Without hesitation, Darius reached for her. Their bodies collided in desperate proximity, heat meeting wet silk, hands tangling in hair and fabric. His lips found hers, a tempestuous kiss that shattered restraint and released months of fear, longing, and unspoken need. It was raw, untamed, the culmination of nights spent in quiet touch, in whispered confessions, in vigil and terror. Time ceased. The wind's howl, the rain's hammering, and the distant roll of thunder became a symphony that celebrated their surrender. Isolde's hands clutched his coat as she returned the kiss with equal fervor, every pulse, every breath, a testament to survival devotion and love that could no longer be denied. When they finally drew apart, gasping for air, gray eyes met amber, searching, tender, and storm-softened. No words were needed. They had crossed the threshold from pretense to truth, from fear to union. Behind them, the storm outside began to wane, lightning fading into the soft drizzle of morning. The world seemed to exhale, as if acknowledging their triumph. Eloan, curled in blankets and now fully awake, smiled faintly in her sleep, a symbol of renewal and hope that anchored their new reality. In the halls of Shadowfen Citadel, whispers of awe had begun. Guests, once skeptical, now spoke in softened tones of the Duke's courage, the scribe's resolve, and the improbable bond that had survived fear, fire, and tempest. Rival intrigues, subplots of jealousy and suspicion, resolved or dissolved in the shadow of this undeniable truth. Love and bravery had prevailed. Isolde rested her forehead against Darius's chest, listening to the storm's retreat and the steady beat of his heart. "We've survived," she murmured, voice barely above the rain's soft patter. "No," he corrected, arms tightening around her, gray eyes gleaming with unwavering certainty. "We've lived. And now we begin." The storm had broken. Their hearts, once imprisoned by duty, fear, and the shadows of past tragedy, were free. And in the first fragile light of dawn, amidst the scent of wet stone and fresh beginnings, Shadowfen Citadel bore witness to the triumph of courage, love, and the relentless power of choosing hope. Sunlight poured over Shadowfen Citadel, gilding towers and spires in warm gold, scattering long shadows that no longer whispered of fear or pretense. The solstice's echoes, once rife with whispers of scandal, mistaken vows, and veiled intentions, had faded into memory, leaving only the resonance of courage, love, and renewal. Guests departed in soft murmurs of admiration, carrying tales of the night when hearts defied expectation and fate had bent, but not broken, the stubborn wills of two extraordinary souls. Isolde Mirai stood beside Darius Kale on the terrace overlooking the citadel's gardens. Her emerald silk now replaced by soft hues of spring, her hair loosely braided with delicate flowers picked from the garden below, she exuded quiet confidence and warmth, every step of her journey etched in her posture. Darius, tall and unwavering, stood with a relaxed authority, his gray eyes softened by laughter lines and the relief of years spent fearing loss yet finding unexpected joy. Their hands were entwined, a living emblem of shared trials and hard-won trust. Below, Eloan's laughter rang through the gardens, vibrant and unrestrained, a sound that could pierce the heaviest shadow. She darted between hedges and fountains, her small hands clutching blossoms, her curls bouncing like sunlight on the wind. Life, once fragile and threatened, now moved with exuberance, a living testament to the nights of vigil, tears, and unspoken promises. Isolde allowed herself a quiet smile, reflecting on the transformation of both citadel and heart. Her mother's care, once burdened by fear of destitution, now flourished under Darius's unwavering support. Their alliance had become more than duty. It had grown into love, respect, and the comfort of shared purpose. She had embraced vulnerability, allowing warmth, hope, and trust to take root in spaces long starved of softness. Darius, in turn, had shed the weight of isolation that had defined him for decades. Reconciliations with kin, quiet yet heartfelt, had restored bonds frayed by tragedy. Lady Thalira, once a meddler whose ivory missteps had set fate in motion, now joined the household in joyous cooperation, her cunning transformed into wisdom. Helena, whose grief had cast long shadows, now smiled openly, sharing laughter and triumph in moments of genuine connection. The citadel, long a fortress of secrets and restraint, had blossomed into a home of life, warmth, and belonging. The announcement of their spring union had sent ripples through society. A love once mistaken, now celebrated, defied gossip and expectation. Courtiers and lords, who had once whispered of scandal and pretense, now spoke in admiration of resilience, courage, and hearts willing to embrace risk for the promise of truth. The world had adjusted to the defiance of love, proving that hearts, once tested in fire, could emerge radiant and unbreakable. Years later, amid another gala, Isolde stood once more in the grand hall, the scent of fresh lilacs and polished wood mingling with soft music. Ivory gowns shimmered under crystal chandeliers, yet her thoughts lingered on the twist of fate that had begun it all, a mistaken veil, a feigned betrothal, a night when a storm forged the unbreakable bond of hearts. Children laughed nearby, their voices light and free, embodying the legacy of courage, love, and the resilience of bonds forged in adversity. She glanced at Darius, whose gray eyes held the quiet joy of years shared, and realized that fulfillment was not merely a dream realized, but a life built on trust, patience, and daring to love fully. Sunlight, laughter, and legacy intertwined, and in the warmth of family, friends, and reclaimed hearts, the citadel stood not as a fortress, but as a beacon, a monument to hope, courage, and love's enduring light. As Isolde traced the memory of ivory veils, storms weathered, and hearts reclaimed, she mused quietly, even amidst misunderstanding and fear, love has a way of carving its truth into the world. And so the tale of Shadowfen Citadel closed not in loss, but in radiant triumph, the bonds of trust, the courage to embrace vulnerability, and the celebration of hearts that refused to surrender to shadows.